We imagine the invention of farming as a triumphant moment for humanity. In the popular imagination, early humans lived in constant starvation and fear until a lone genius figured out how to plant a seed, saving our species from the harsh wilderness and giving us the gift of civilization. Thomas Hobbes famously summed up this assumed natural state of man as nasty, brutish, and short. But the archaeological record reveals a completely different reality. Pre-agricultural hunter-gatherers actually worked only a few hours a day to meet their basic needs. They enjoyed highly diverse, nutrient-rich diets sourced from dozens of different wild plants and animals. When bioarchaeologists examine the skeletal remains of these ancient foragers, they find robust bones and very few signs of chronic disease. Furthermore, because these nomadic groups couldn't stockpile resources, they lived in deeply egalitarian societies. Wealth inequality simply did not exist. This leaves us with a massive historical paradox. If foraging was so adaptable, healthy, and leisurely, why did human populations universally abandon it for the vulnerable, backbreaking labor of cultivation? The answer is that they didn't jump into agriculture, they were pushed. To understand this, we have to look at the climate. For the vast majority of human history, the planet was locked in severe glacial maximums. But roughly 15,000 years ago, the Earth began to warm. The glaciers retreated, and the Pleistocene epoch gave way to the Holocene. All that melting ice caused sea levels to rise dramatically. Coastlines were pushed inland by up to 1,000 kilometers. Millions of acres of prime coastal hunting grounds were swallowed up by the ocean, compressing human populations into tighter, crowded inland territories. At the exact same time, slow but steady population growth was filling up the remaining resource-rich river valleys. Eventually, these prime environments reached their carrying capacity. Anthropologists call what happened next the Marginal Zone Hypothesis. Groups at the edges of these crowded areas spilled over into suboptimal, arid habitats where wild food was scarce. To survive in these harsh environments without the option of migrating to better land, these displaced groups had to artificially inflate the amount of food the land could produce. They started tending, weeding, and watering specific high-yield wild plants just to avoid starvation. The first steps toward farming were not a stroke of genius. Agriculture was a compulsory, grinding adaptation to global overpopulation and the exhaustion of open frontiers. And yet, environmental pressure is only half the story. The way humans organized themselves socially locked the trap in place. In places like the ancient Levant, groups actually settled down into permanent villages thousands of years before they domesticated a single crop. These early sedentary societies developed complex rituals and a drive for social status. Ambitious individuals began hosting highly competitive feasts, requiring massive amounts of food. Cereals and grains were highly prized because they could be stored for months and fermented into beer. This reliance on grain triggered a biological chain reaction. Foragers fed their infants tough, fibrous wild foods, which meant mothers breastfed for years. But the shift to a diet rich in soft, easily digestible cereal paps allowed farming mothers to wean their infants much earlier. This chart tracks human population growth over time. You can see the slow, flat expansion of ancient hunter-gatherers, spanning hundreds of thousands of years. Then, right as cereal diets are introduced, the line shoots straight up. Early weaning shortened the biological resting period between pregnancies, causing maternal fertility and overall birth rates to skyrocket. Demographers call this the Neolithic Demographic Transition. This was the trap. With their numbers multiplying exponentially, the population quickly grew too massive to be sustained by wild resources. Returning to the foraging lifestyle was now a biological impossibility. Humanity was anchored to the soil. The consequences for the individual were devastating. The repetitive, exhausting labor of tilling and harvesting wrecked human bodies. Skeletons from early farming communities show high rates of stunted growth, severe dental decay, and degenerative joint disease compared to their foraging ancestors. Farming also created an epidemiological nightmare. People were now living closely packed together in permanent settlements, alongside newly domesticated livestock like pigs and cattle. This created perfect conditions for zoonotic diseases, illnesses that mutate and jump from animals to humans to tear through communities. Socially, the changes were just as severe. Surviving on strictly seasonal harvests required the invention of advanced granaries. For the very first time in human history, communities generated storable wealth. Once you have a silo full of grain, you have something that your neighbors can steal. The need to defend these stockpiles birthed the concept of possession-based private property, completely shattering the egalitarian sharing norms that had sustained human groups for millennia. Those who controlled the granaries controlled the population. This dynamic engineered the foundations of rigid social stratification, measurable wealth inequality, and continuous organized warfare over land and resources. On an individual level, the transition to agriculture was a physical and social disaster. Yet, on a macroeconomic scale, it was an absolute triumph. Despite the disease and the drudgery, farming allowed the total global human population to increase by 600% in just 10 millennia. By artificially increasing the carrying capacity of the land, agriculture generated enough surplus calories to feed people who didn't farm at all. It freed a small fraction of society from the daily pursuit of food, allowing them to become specialized artisans, record keepers, builders, and scientists. The invention of agriculture was a blind evolutionary bargain. We traded the physical health, the leisure time, and the social equality of the individual to ensure the explosive biological expansion of the species. It was a devastating trap for the first farmers, but it provided the exact caloric foundation required to build the modern world.